Alright, welcome back. The next several parts in this series are going to be focused on the Enlightenment, specifically the early era of the Enlightenment, its establishment, origins, and also the early influences that will help us to understand um, the foundations really of how we perceive our world even today. They're going to be reverberating effects centered in Europe, but have effects felt worldwide, as we'll see. To lay a little bit of groundwork, just to anchor ourselves once again in the era in which we're talking about. You have following 1648 and the 30 Years' War, Europe trying to rehabilitate itself after that costly event. There is low population growth. This is as a result of a smaller family size, where resources to support families and the population are in short supply. Also, there's a higher infant mortality rate as a result of things like poor nutrition and those scarce resources at hand. People begin to marry later in life, so they begin to have start families at a later age, which helps to minimize and keep small families, nuclear families, small in size. Also, older people, the elderly, are really going to be increasingly left at the mercy of charity, both public and private. State aid, if there was any to begin with, was not a fixed policy. That was often, kind of more of a ad hoc type of arrangement. And oftentimes families that were struggling just to make ends meet for themselves and the small size that they could sustain, this meant that family care for their parents or grandparents or what have you, the elderly again, were cast out, making them more of a public liability or a public responsibility in many respects. Adult men had a higher mortality rate than women during the latter parts of the 17th and into the 18th century, but it is essential to understand that women's mortality rates spiked during the childbearing years. This is as a result of high death rates in the birthing of children. That there was not kind of the medical conveniences at hand that there are, in more kind of again modern society, contemporary society. So that was kind of a very an experience that brought about a high level of anxiety. But there were also successive waves of plagues and disease that, as a result of intermittent conflict and also continued poor nutrition. So it's in this environment in which you have a parallel development taking place, that of the scientific method and also its successor, basically the enlightened era, in which people begin to try and understand through scientific means the ability or creating methods for solving systemic problems in society, in European society. To go about studying the issues and the problems, and then going about and creating strategic plans for their resolution. That kind of approach is the groundwork for this period, these intellectual developments that are beginning to take place. To define the Enlightenment on a very broad kind of scale, it is the application of the scientific method to virtually all aspects of human life. This was combined with an optimistic sense of individual that focused on individual empowerment through self-enrichment. That, again, individuals had agency over their predicaments, and that they could, see to their resolution. So this helps us lay the cornerstone of modern life and intellectualism. And of course, it is the context, even today, by which we come to understand our world, our physical surroundings, but also our learning processes and philosophical investigation as well. And that's what we're going to begin to study here. We'll kind of scratch the surface with the early thinkers and scientists, but then also continue to follow up with later kind of manifestations of enlightened thought. As far as the scientific method is concerned, again, in the context of the 30 period of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, you have two experiences that really kind of bookend the entire scope of the scientific method. That is the approach of observation, studying causality, outcomes, and then drawing conclusions as a result of that, the processes involved in all of that. Those two experiences are best represented by Galilei on the one hand, and Sir Isaac Newton, Isaac Newton, later to become Sir Isaac Newton, on the other hand. Galileo died in 1642. Sir Isaac Newton was born in 1643, so they weren't contemporaries of each other, but they're, that 1 year gap really kind of shows you just how pivotal the first half was to the second half of the 17th century, and the variety of experiences that they had. What were those experiences? Well, for Galileo, during the latter part of his life, he was actually forced to recant his scientific findings and the books that he wrote as a result of what he had observed. And that was mainly due to the popularity, the onset of the Inquisition, the church's efforts to police knowledge. Fast forward to the latter part of the 17th century, and Isaac Newton is going to not have that experience really at all. He is going to be free to create a new scientific language, or a new mathematical language, that of calculus, and he is going to derive natural laws of gravity that he believed kind of governed the universe. And he's also living his life in an era where there are the establishing of more formalized institutions, scientific academies, such as the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, established in 1663. We'll also see examples of in Paris, France, where colleagues and fellow scientists, the scientific community, are going to create institutions for themselves. These are forums in which there will be public debate and lecture, so that you have the exchange of ideas, the presenting of new theories and new knowledge and material for the community to kind of digest and build upon. So this is all integral and characteristic of this scientific method and its immediate successor, the Enlightenment itself. So we'll examine how this happened. I mean, we've done so a little bit just a moment ago, but we'll continue to see how that expresses itself in the early Enlightenment. We'll identify the key figures of the era, the competing philosophies that emerged during this period of time, the major influences, and also obviously the significance of what the early Enlightenment had on not only developments in Europe but also again worldwide. As far as the paths to the Enlightenment are concerned, science was growing and becoming more sophisticated, but it needed some public relations. It's one thing for scientists to uncover and reveal new mysteries and solve them of the natural world, the philosophical world, or what have you, but to convey that very kind of scientific or particular type of language to the broader public so that it can be understood. This is what kind of faced scientists during the early eras of the Enlightenment. One individual, a man by the name of Bernard de Fontenelle, who was the secretary of the French Royal Academy of Science, which was established in 1691. Bernard is going to understand scientific principles, but he wasn't a tremendously kind of outstanding, you might say, scientific mind himself, but he did have the ability to popularize science, to translate it into layman's terms in order to be, kind of for the public to understand its application and why science is important. He does this in one work. It's titled The Plurality of Worlds. This is a discussion that Bernard writes this. It's a discussion of astronomy in kind of a literary kind of format or context. It takes place in the with these two lovers conversing under a night sky in order to convey the kind of astronomy and astronomy's principles to a broader kind of public. So that's one way of kind of popularizing these fields of science. There's also within the community itself a growing sense of skepticism, particularly when you have science beginning to intersect with religious truths, or what were held as religious truths during this period of time. Within the scientific community, there's going to be an intense focus and gravitation towards the secularization of thought. So the intellectual developments begin to diverge increasingly from the religious community. Prior to events like the Renaissance, you had those two in lockstep, because those that were the most learned were members of the clergy. Well, now, as a result of what we studied during the Renaissance era, you have basically that fissure, that break beginning to widen, and it continues to widen here during the Enlightenment. One key figure that best represents this is Pierre Boyle. He was a French Protestant who was highly critical of religious attitudes. Um, Religious attitudes being things like superstition, religious intolerance, dogmatism. Boyle and others opposed this sense of religious conformity that just referencing to the absolutist monarchy that was being established in France under Louis XIV, and his efforts to create not only a unitary state but also a monolithic religious order as well. These are things that Boyle and others are going to begin to push back against. Boyle is going to support religious diversity and tolerance, seeing this as beneficial to state affairs, to governing. And he's going to begin to apply textualized criticism to published scriptures, such as the Bible. Boyle was, again, one intellectual among many who began to do this. And of course, this is going to create friction, most visibly within those societies that were more autocratic in nature, because it was within those autocratic political systems that were more rigid, more resistant to different interpretations, and as a result, more resistant to change. Skepticism was also aided by growth in the travel industry and the continued kind of process of broadening one's kind of physical and philosophical horizons. This coincided with the English and Portuguese that were early explorers of Spanish as well, but also the Dutch that were beginning to establish colonies worldwide. One of the best examples is the Dutch Republic itself. In 1658, they are actually going to expel Portugal from Ceylon, the large island just off the southern southern tip of the Indian subcontinent in the Indian Ocean. They're also going to establish permanent settlements in the Spice Islands, which are located in the center of what is today the Indonesian archipelago. They set up another outpost in Malaya, and of course they have settlements or colonies in North America, in places like what is today Manhattan Island and New York, in what is today Delaware, that were then, through a series of conflicts, that became English settlements and fell under English law. But nonetheless, they had been established as Dutch colonies originally. The Dutch are also going to settle in portions of South America as well. So it's through this kind of little international network that not only is there going to be the exchange of goods, as we've discussed at length under the mercantilist system, but there's also going to be a increased interaction and different kind of approaches that people begin to buy into with regard to the natural world, but also how to live life itself. So people, these traders, missionaries, medical practitioners, and explorers all begin to write about and publish their experiences and their adventures. This leads to the expansion of contact and knowledge of the world and the variety of cultures locked within. There's the discovery of places like Tahiti, New Zealand, the continent of Australia, by the likes of James Cook, an English explorer, a British. He's a naval sea captain, but he publishes his findings in what's called Travels, which became a bestseller back in England. In many cases, people that visit these places that kind of convey their preliminary findings and reactions, present alternatives, kind of this simpler life as a better, happier life, so that there's this rise of kind of an iconic deference paid to the noble savage. Closeness to nature was something that was to be admired and emulated in many respects. So now, on the surface, that's kind of the initial takeaway. Of course, at the same time, this also held very kind of paternalistic or debatable kind of contexts, with racial, socially and culturally racial kind of aspects to it embedded within those interpretations as well. But it does provide Europeans with a sense of an alternative. And in some respects, they begin to critique Western civilization by comparing these different ways of living life and philosophical approaches, so that cultural certainties become less so. You have the emergence of what's called actually cultural relativism, where customs were more a product of what worked for a given people in a given region, and that there was a less of an emphasis placed on what is right and what is wrong. So travel itself becomes a culturally and spiritually disorienting kind of endeavor, and that with it, people come to understand that Christianity was simply one way to know God, but it was by no means the only way. So this helps us to get into the intellectual aspects of enlightenment as well. Now, I talked just moments ago about Sir Isaac Newton. He is going to lay down a series of what would be known as scientific laws. In 1687, he is going to write a landmark book, oftentimes described as one of the most important works in human history. It's known as the Principia Mathematica, in which he identified gravity as the force that held the universe together. So he is going to basically establish a notion of natural laws that are governing the operation of the cosmos on the one kind of massive scale, but then also how these natural laws govern everyday life in many respects as well. That humanity existed within nature, that was a creation of a giant machine, essentially. And this idea, these notions of natural laws that governed key mechanics within this whole framework that we can experience through our senses, this began to gain traction and also began to be applied outside of the natural world itself to include aspects of life such as politics, economics, justice, and religion as well, as we'll see in several examples. So this was a systematic, I should say, approach to understanding these natural laws and their application to any and all things. One of the best examples of how this translated to something like politics can best be seen by the political writings of John Locke, among others. Locke was an English political philosopher living in the writing, I should say, in the late 17th century. In response to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 occurring in England that we've covered in previous lectures, he is going to write a treatise known as the Two Treatises on Civil Government in order to explain in a politically philosophical context what the Glorious Revolution was about. He believed that the English people, through their inviting of William of Orange and his wife Mary to return to England and replace the Catholic ruler James in this kind of bloodless or near bloodless revolution, he argued that this exemplified people's having a voice in government as a result of what he called the social contract. This was a mutual agreement between the governing on the one hand and those that were governed on the other hand. And if government became oppressive, then the people had a right through this social contract, this understanding, they had a right to overthrow government. They had a right to, as John Locke put it, life, liberty, and the ownership of property. Now, as you can see, this has very close parallels to American political philosophers, the likes of Thomas Jefferson and his writing of the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we cherish, in the American kind of context. So Locke is here basically laying the groundwork for the relationship between the people and the government, and the how people organize themselves and the rights that they retain as a part of the public when they come together in communities and decide to submit to government, and what the responsibilities government has in order to maintain its legitimacy. Just a few years later, in 1690, John Locke is going to publish another key work, and it's known as the Essay Concerning Human Understanding, in which he is going to argue that everyone began as what he called a tabula rasa, a blank slate. So here he's beginning to investigate the nature of learning and how human beings come to engage in the act of learning itself, the acquiring of knowledge. And he believed that because human beings at birth were simply a blank slate, that they had no innate idea of themselves or anything in their environment, he believed that as a result, our experiences as human beings was the source of our ideas and how we acquired knowledge and reason. So we came to know the world, and we come to know our surroundings and everything within it through what he called, and what we know as today, empiricism, the study of knowledge through the act of experience. So we come to know things by interacting with our surroundings, but also implicit within this is the idea that knowledge gained from our environment means that we gain it through reason rather than something like faith. Okay? Again, this has a consequence with regard to religious philosophy, and again is another example of the yawning gap between science and reason on the one hand and faith on the other. If, in the eyes of Locke, he believed that individuals, the acquisition and the pursuit of knowledge in one's environment, that you could, if you manipulated your environment, you could then begin to manipulate your understanding of an acquisition of knowledge, where that means that if you applied proper influences to the environment, then you could help organize and foment the creation of a proper society. Utopianism would be kind of the intent that he's trying to establish here. So it's a different way of creating a utopian-like existence, an idealized way of learning or living. And also you can see how heavily rooted it is in and emphasizes laws and reason. This kind of sense of conformity as far as that aspect's concerned. I'm going to pause here for part one, and I'll pick up with the rise of other philosophers, as they were known, these other kinds of thinkers that begin to emerge. So stay tuned for that.